大家好，先看美联储潜在的新任主席沃什的最近一期接受 CNBC 采访的视频，然后我会给大家做沃什上台后可能会有哪些经济变化的解读。
Transformational moment in U.S. economic history. This is, as George Shultz told me before he passed, a hinge point in history. I think the president's language is this could be a golden age. And frankly, I think they all could be right. Good policies could advance this U.S. economy, what we call AI. In a couple of years, we'll just call business. And AI is going to make almost everything cost less. And the U.S. can be a big winner. That's my argument to Ken. I think Ken's now come on to the president's side.
That's what he said when he was here.
And it's a hugely exciting moment. If I were to step back for a minute, if I were the president, what I'd be worried about is a central bank that doesn't see any of that. A central bank that is stuck with models from 1978, governance from a prior period, and don't recognize we could be at the front end of a productivity boom. And if I were the president, I'd be worried that they might not see it. And they might think economic growth is somehow going to be inflationary. I think we were probably in the early innings of a structural decline in prices. Ken sees it on the front lines of real businesses. And I think if you look over the period of the next year or two, it's a pretty special moment.
We've been talking today about how far the Fed should forecast, how predictive they should be, if they should be dependent on data that's coming in. And, you know, there's one school of thought that says it would be better to have somebody who sees this and can anticipate in advance. That's what great money managers do. But great money managers don't always get it right either. We spoke earlier with Nick Timmerose, who made the point that, look, sometimes it's better to wait so that if there is a mistake, you can recalibrate much more quickly.
So I heard a little bit about that interview, and I heard Nick say something like, well, what we need is continuity. My goodness, I think that's the last thing that we need. The broad conduct of monetary policy has been broken for quite a long time. The central bank that sits there today is radically different than the central bank I joined in 2006. I don't think we need policy continuity that brought about the greatest mistake in macroeconomic policy in 45 years, that divided the country, that caused a surge in inflation. I don't think we need continuity when the central bank doesn't have credibility. Last September, Becky, as you'll recall, the Fed cut interest rates 100 basis points, 50 basis points before the election, 50 basis points after. Inflation was 50% higher then than it is now. And what did the bond market do when they cut rates? Long rates went up 75 basis points. That's a credibility crisis. So listen, this isn't the first time you've heard me in the last decade say we need regime change at the Fed. It's not just about a person. It's about an approach to economics. It's about approach to what they're doing. And I'm troubled when I see them moving the goalposts. It is very puzzling to me, Becky, how you could think that we should do emergency rate cuts last September, and now all of a sudden you stand there like a hawk. That's not good for the institution. I don't think it's good for the economy to be changing the goalposts like that. Paul Volcker, when he came in, not only have 12 years of experience in government and 6 at the Fed, I've got some knowledge of Fed history. Paul Volcker came in and said, we don't need continuity, we need regime change. And it was that regime change that brought inflation back and reestablished the Fed as this beacon of credibility. But the president at the time put in some members under the Volcker team afterwards that forced what some thought would be a coup. It hasn't always been pretty. In fact, my own view, Andrew, is what the Fed needs is more robust discussion of ideas, less groupthink. I don't like it that everyone's following the same models. To give you just one simple example, the dominant models at the Fed, which might have been the best models there were in 1978, what do they think, Andrew? They think inflation comes if the economy runs too hot and workers get paid too much. That's not my view. I think we could use a new idea, a new theory of inflation, so let me practice one for you.
Okay.
Inflation happens when the government prints too much, spends too much, and lives too well. That theory that money has something to do with monetary policy is nowhere in the central thinking at the Fed. I think if those ideas were imported into the discussion, we could have a good family fight about it.
You don't get to decide how much is spent. That's up to Congress, and the president has to sign off on those things. Would you support them? And I guess the biggest question, Kevin, is people are wondering, the next Fed chairman, is he going to be independent? Is he going to say, and I say he because right now the candidates that we're hearing are all men, is he going to be independent? Is he going to do what he thinks is right, despite what the White House may advise or think, what the administration thinks?
So in a word, yes. So I've strongly believed for 20 years, and history tells us that the independent operations in the conduct of monetary policy is essential. But that doesn't mean the Fed is independent in everything else it does. In fact, if I look at the track record of the Powell Fed over the last 6 or 7 years, they've tried to say, how dare you be critical of us? We're independent in everything. Well, that's nonsense. They wandered into climate change, a subject upon which they have no comparative advantage. With a change of this administration, they said, just kidding. They wandered into another political area of which they were never assigned, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They changed the remit that Congress gave them about whether they were in the business of full employment or full inclusive employment. This change in their definition in 2020 is one of the key reasons why we had the great mistake, the great inflation. And on spending, Becky, during the period of the last administration, what did they say to Congress? Spend, spend, spend. So like you, I think they should stay in their lane. But it's very strange to me that they're asymmetric. Spend a bunch of money when it's popular. And now if you get asked about spending constraint, what does the leadership at the Fed say? Oh, no, that's not about us. You should establish what the rules of the road are and stick with it, regardless of the administration. I think the Fed has done a very good job of blaming others for their mistakes. It's been very popular to blame the president because he's being so mean to them. Well, most of the Fed's mistakes are because of choices they've made. They've done a very good job in the business of politics. The inflation that has done huge harm to the American people. First, they blamed Vladimir Putin. It was because of the war. Then what did they do next? They blamed the pandemic. Supply chains, they would say.
Well, supply chain was legit for a lot of inflationary.
Well, it changed the level of prices because that's what happens in a market economy. But that's not what inflation is. Inflation is what happens to the Fed. The Fed is responsible for inflation. The Fed makes a choice about inflation, and the problem is the Fed has made that choice poorly. So they've got someone new to blame for all these mistakes, and a lot of their co-conspirators in the media seem to believe it. The new mistake is the reason why they're not doing the right thing on rates is because of the president and those tariffs. He's being so mean.
现在我们来解读一下，如果沃什真的担任美联储主席之后，会对美联储的决策和世界经济带来哪些变化？我觉得最大的一个转变是，你可以把它理解成美联储这次会彻底撂挑子了。以前的美联储像一个操心的大家长，市场一哭，比如股市大跌，他就赶紧的给糖吃，比如放水救市。美国政府钱不够花了，他呢就在背后悄悄的帮忙，买一些美国国债，顺道压低利率。甚至气候变暖、社会公平，美联储呢都想管一管。这次沃什要是上台，核心的思想就一句话，我就好好干我的本职工作，别的都归市场自己管。你可以把它理解成这是一个保守主义的开始。沃什的本职工作是什么？就2样，带领美联储控制通胀，稳住就业。其他的，比如美国股市到底是涨是跌，美国政府欠多少钱，地球暖不暖，对不起，沃什带领下的美联储这些他都不会再管了。具体会有哪些变化？我呢总结了4条，我们慢慢来看。第一条，市场里面的便宜钱会越来越少，赚钱可能更难了。这里解释一下赚钱更难了，比如大家炒美股的时候，可能发现选股票或者是股价上涨可能会更难。过去10几年，为什么大家总感觉钱生钱好像很容易？因为美联储这个大家长一直在给市场打开水龙头，市场里面流动性泛滥。但是现在沃什要做的是， 坚定的、慢慢的把这个放水的水龙头拧紧。大家也可以把它理解成缩表。这意味着什么？意味着以前那种只要市场一跌，央行就来托底的潜规则彻底没了。市场波动会变大，就像坐过山车。那些靠不断借便宜钱活着的僵尸企业，或者是上市公司，可能这次真的要混不下去了。但是呢，也不要灰心，长远来看，钱会从各种金融空转的机构被挤出来，并且呢，会流向那些真正干实事的行业和公司，比如现在正在热起的人工智能和高端制造行业。第二个，美国政府借钱过日子也不会那么容易了。以前美国政府发国债，美联储就是头号接盘侠，用印钞的钱来买，变相在给美国政府提供低成本的融资。沃什的理念是，这个忙我不帮了，政府如果要借钱，就去公开市场上找真正的买家，按市场真实的利率去借。这样一来，如果美国政府赤字太高，花钱太猛，市场就会用更高的利率来借给他，这相当于给美国政府花钱的欲望上了一个市场化的紧箍咒，倒逼美国政府会收敛。这对美联储来说是一次重要的独立宣言。第三个可能的改变是，美联储自身也会瘦身，开始专注自己的核心业务。这几年大家都知道，美联储的手伸得特别长。在沃什看来，这些美联储手伸得太长的不务正业的事情，在他上台后可能会明确砍掉，就死磕控制通胀和促进就业。简单的来说，就是从什么都掺和变成只专注做自己的事情。第四个变化，美联储会重新定义鹰派和鸽派。在传统的资本市场，如果你主张加息，那就是鹰派；如果你主张降息，那就是鸽派。但沃什上台后，可能这个标准会发生变化，哪怕沃什主张降息，但是他也会坚持缩表，不就是不管上面所提到的任何闲事。沃什就是真正的保守派，他的鹰体现在原则和纪律上。总结一下，如果沃什的理念能够落地，美国可能会告别一个由央行无限兜底、流动性泛滥的金融时代，进入一个波动更大、钱流向更讲究的新阶段。这对长期习惯了大水漫灌的市场会有巨大的阵痛，但是呢，对经济的长期健康发展可能是一剂良药苦口。好了，今天沃什可能担任美联储新任主席的话题就聊到这里。你觉得美联储应该管得宽一点，还是恪守本分呢？欢迎在评论区聊聊你的看法。